Thank you for joining us today, Dr. Elgun.
Thank you very much for the invitation.
And thank you for all you do for women and girls and, 1950s women.
Yeah, and it's an important movement, as I think, as a beginning, the suffragist movement, beginning of 20th century, women's rights in UK. We need to continue.
Would you be all right just to say a little bit about what you do, what your role is first?
I am close to 25 years working on the human rights defense, human rights protection system, especially women rights and child rights protection system, prevention on the regional level and universal level. 12 years I worked in Council of Europe in Gender Equality Commission, participated in the preparation of Istanbul Convention and different documents, international agreements, legislation acts on the national and international level as a lawyer and international lawyer. At the same time, I worked last 6 years as a CEDAW committee member. CEDAW committee member, I was vice chair, vice president, 2021-2022 of CEDAW committee. At the same time, at this moment, I am a member of CEDAW committee. And I am the member vice chair at this moment of the communication section, which are working especially with individual applications. Now we are continuing our work on the human rights protection system.
Thank you for that. Yes. Thank you for joining us today, Dr. Elgun. And please tell us about the CSW 69, that's the 69th session of the Commission on the Status of Women, and Beijing 30 years since the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action in 1995, and how together they advance women's rights in the UK, the impact of European countries and the Council of Europe.
Thank you very much. Very interesting question, by the way. And when we go to the CSW, we know that the CSW is the main international event on the women's rights during the year. Each year it's including one CSW organized by the UN Women, especially, and the CEDAW committee members and all international organizations, as all worlds which are signing and participating in international relations, participating in this event in New York. What's the role of the Beijing 30? We know that in 1995, when it was structured a little bit difficult after the collapse of the Soviet Union, it was different situation on women's rights in the regional rights, African situation, African countries after the colonial situation, and what going on was the history. Women's rights in 90s is independent and developing of the structure. And when we say about the beginning of the 20th century, for example, suffragist system of the women's rights in 20th century beginning and 1960s years, it's fully different. We need to compare the real situation because Beijing 1995 adopted special platform when including all human rights standards for women. And at that moment, the beginning the equalizing situation, not just for Europe, for example, equality, transparency, human rights, women participation in entrepreneurship, decision-making positions, women accessibility and girls accessibility to the health, to the education structures and different services using it. And it's one of the main documents which including the same time. By the way, at that moment, all the Beijing 1995 platform, the same time advocates the implementation and ratification of CEDAW Convention. That's why it was important document. And this year it was already the different understandings that this year we already have this, several principles. What's the main principles of the understanding? It's including that all continents participation, especially as every year we have participated in this event and beginning of the opening with the main continental representation. We have the precedent law, we have the continental legal system, we have the tribunal law, we implementing from the legal side and comparison. It giving possibility for the states, not just for the government, but at the same time as the NGOs, civil societies, and all human rights defenders coming and exchanging the information during the CSW. And what can it give to the United Kingdom? As we know, United Kingdom give many best examples of the different development of the human rights. At the same time, one of the main principles of the development, what we can take from the United Kingdom, as England, as Wales, as Scotland, as all countries, including this process, many positive things. And the development of the human rights, we see that development of the United Kingdom system, how it gives the feedbacks. Today we have such kind of bridge between the systems, the international organizations, bilateral developments, and United Nations. For example, regional organizations as Council of Europe, as European Union, as, for example, implementation directly through the United Nations. That's why when we're comparing the real situation, we need to understand that's a real problem, that sometimes we see that in some spheres, for example, in education, we see very good points. There's a UK sharing the education possibilities on women rights, on gender equality possibilities with different countries. Universities, one of the best universities in the ranking. We have the health, sometimes at the same time we have the problems, for example, as you see on the pension rights, on the pay gap coming from the countries 70s, 80s, 90s till this year. Of course, it's already reduced the situation of the pay gap in the United Kingdom at this moment. But what about the woman which has a 40, 50, 60 years old? They have the problems because the main point of employment when they including in this process, it was a problem that the pay gap including, that the pension between the men and women are different. That's why when we're seeing the problems, we have the good sides of each country and the sometimes not so good, which need to be working on the side. And United Kingdom, one of the best examples how they're working from the political way, from the same time, from the discussion as pluralism, but at the same time, we have the open questions. For example, as the confederation status of the United Kingdom situation, as the special status of Northern Ireland, as special status of Wales, special status of Scotland and England, we see some differences in the legislation and some unity principles need to be included, especially when we see the problems of the abortion cases, which is important because women have their own body and she must give the decision about herself. And we need to compare the situations at the beginning of the fundamental human rights situations.
Thank you very much for that. With the 75th anniversary of the European Convention on Human Rights, what is the main role in the process of fundamental human rights protection?
Already, it's a main regional document, European Convention on Human Rights, which is marking 75th anniversary. And for us, it's very important because when we say about the countries which ratified this, when we say regional situation in between the situations, for example, what's happening in Europe, we have conflict situations, we have migration problems, refugee problems, we have the problems of the accessibility to the Europe countries comparing its full Europe, when we say South Europe, for example, East Europe, accessibility to the health, accessibility to education, accessibility to the nationality, problems of the citizenship during the born, for example, in several countries. It's one of the problems, family reunifications, domestic violence cases, and different understandings. That's why when we're coming on the resolving of these questions, CEDAW Convention was one of the instruments. But one of the regional, very important universal instruments, of course, it's European Convention on Human Rights, which coming from the point as giving the implementing and underlining in 1950, which adopted in 1953, right to live, freedom of religion and belief, freedom of assembly, human rights and environment, human rights and health, rights of free election, and the different political and the different sides of the human rights system. That's why when we say about the comparison of the system, what did European Convention on Human Rights give to the development of the European countries? First of all, it was collaboration, common document for the all European countries at that moment, after the Second World War. We need to understand that adoption of the Statute of UN in 1945-46, implementation beginning as a process, preparing also all human rights freedoms and human rights standards at that moment beginning just. It's a beginning side. And when it was prepared in 1950, adopted an implementation process beginning from 1950s as a 54, 55 after the ratification status implementation, we see that the problems coming on. That's why at that moment it was one of the universal documents which adopted after the Second World War, which implemented. That's why when we say about the European Court of Human Rights, which using this convention as a main statute for them, and at the same time different documents are adopted by the Council of Europe, for example, and United Nations, they're trying to use this convention as a ECHR convention for the implementation, especially from all sides. And they're using, by the way, not just the continental legal system, by the way, precedent law developed by the UK legislation, especially. That's why we need to know that legislation of the system of the United Kingdom as a precedent system law, as a common law, giving the main development system of the ECHR system as legal systems. What it give it to the ordinary, to the citizens, for the European citizens, it giving the system of the development of the human rights. For example, that's why today young generation cannot compare what was the problem of the 80s, 70s, 60s. What's the most problem after the Second World War? That was limited accessibility to water, to the health institutions, to the all infrastructures. At the beginning of the building new roads, at the beginning of the, for example, in Germany, in France systems, because when we say about in Russia, after the Second World War, we got the real problems and economic development beginning from the 60s, because we lose 20 years for the beginning of the creating new system, as a creating new infrastructure, as a Europe, as a whole Europe. That's why when we're comparing ECHR, giving the main standards of the development of the system as beginning of the human rights and creating a human rights infrastructure between the countries and creating the standards for the citizens of the Europe. And one of the main documents of the creating as the European Union at that moment, as the standards for the Council of Europe, for example, at the same time. That's why for us as the Europeans, as for example, from United Kingdom, as a France citizens, as a Germany citizens, and from all European country members, it's important, this convention, especially implementation from the all sides, which implementing the directly, giving the additional possibilities. For example, right to fair trial, right to liberty and security, freedom from slavery and human trafficking, right to equal and freedom from discrimination, right to family life, freedom of speech, freedom from torture and ill treatment, right to privacy, right to property. Its main standard underlined at that moment in 1950s, which coming till this. That's why we need to understand till 1950s we haven't this standard. It's reality. In Europe, it didn't implement it because we haven't the legal standards. Each country has their own standards, and this convention giving the unity, beginning from the legal side, the unity for the all countries, European borders, to develop in this side. And for us, it's an honor that we participating in this slide, but it's a lesson for us. Second World War and the documents adopted after that as a Statute of United Nations, European Convention of the Human Rights is the main standards and beginning from the different conventions for the prevention of war situation of creating the common standards of human rights for all accessibility. Because when we comparing, for example, women rights, we need to understand that women, for example, in many countries till 1950s did not have the voting rights. It's a reality. In many European countries, they cannot participate in public lives. They cannot participate, for example, in entrepreneurship till these years. They cannot be participating in elected positions. Yes, we have a good point, for example, in United Kingdom, beginning from 1930s, beginning the elections. In Azerbaijan, beginning in 1919, for example, election rights for women equality, but not all countries have the same standards. That's why this convention is giving for women, especially as a human rights system, giving possibility to use equally with men all human rights standards, all human rights as a protection system.
Thank you. Thank you very much. You've chosen a few musical choices, so I was wondering whether you'd like to pick your first musical choice that we could play now.
We have Sami Yusuf. We have some exposition of Nasimi. Nasimi was a poet of the middle centuries, and it's already more than close to 800 years at that moment he lived, and it's beginning from his poesy. Sami Yusuf, if you can find, but I know that many European using it, especially as a philosophical side of the Nasimi, and we can maybe sharing these possibilities with our listeners, especially if you're radio listener. I know that it will be a little bit different for the UK listeners, but at the same time, I think that it will be interesting.
چرخچی خواهم من نسوانی کی جهان من جهان سمازم kökleri namekanım köklü mekana sığmazam zerre menem güneş menem çarine ben cüşeş menem sünneti gör beyan ile çünkü beyan sığmazam Sığmazam cürət bilən mən bu dükana sığmazam. Şəhrinə həm şəkər mənəm, şəms mənəm, qəmər mənəm, ruhi rəvan bağışlaram, ruhi rəvana sığmazam. Məndən sığmar iki cahan, mən bu cahana sığmazam. Gözlərim aməkan mənəm, gözlərim məkana sığmazam. Məndən sığmar iki cahan, mən bu cahana sığmazam. Gözlərim aməkan mənəm, gözlərim məkana sığmazam. Mən bu cahana sığmazam, mən bu cahana sığmazam, mən bu cahana sığmazam.
94.4 FM and worldwide at salfordcityradio.org. You're listening to A Bit of Everything.
And today my guest is Dr. Elgun Safarov, Vice Chair of the United Nations CEDAW Committee Working Group on Communications. Now, civil society organisations are voluntary grassroots organisations promoting the good and rights of people. How can civil society actively participate in the process of the implementation, concluding observation and recommendations? And what is the responsibility of the government in the civil society organisations, CSOs, activities support?
First of all, no dialogue without NGOs, no any without public organizations, without CSOs. Each dialogue must be participating. First of all, participation, so the report, alternative report which coming. Because government giving the report, it's understandable. Sometimes it's political. Sometimes it's defending. We understand that it's defend their positions, and it's normal. But at the same time, we must have strong NGOs, CSOs. Without NGOs, you cannot see the development of any side of human rights. It's a fundamental system of the development of the country, by the way. When we're giving the economic, when we're giving the question of security, we need to understand without human rights system protection, we cannot have any development in economic and security system. Without, when we say that in each country we have the women more than 50%, that's why important the human rights system as a part of the human rights system will be developed at the same time. And NGOs as the CSOs must participate during the dialogue as a counterpart, as a partner with the comparing with the government. Because they're giving alternative reports, how they're seeing the situation on the place. For example, what's happening in the village, what's happening in the regions, what's happening in the small cities, that they can work today through applications. And it's important because they're listening, and it's important to have the strong NGO system in each country. This is showing the development of the country. Unfortunately, sometimes we have some countries developed economically coming without NGOs, and it's a very big problem. It's showing that NGOs did not develop in these countries. And economic development is sometimes false. It's reality, because it's not just the numbers. It's the happiness comparison of the people living in this country. It's reality. That's why I do not want to give the name of the countries. We have the developed economic countries, but at the same time, the human rights system not so good situation as a face-to-face. But the reality is that that will be under the risk. That's why when we say about the situation of the participation, CSOs, NGOs, non-governmental organizations, it's important that public organizations will be as equally participate during the reporting procedures. Not just the CEDAW committee, CRC, Child Rights Committee, Anti-Torture Committee, Migration Committee, with all committees of the United Nations, as not just the United Nations, as the European region, as the Council of Europe at the same time, because they are an important part of the development of the community, and NGOs' role, it's important. At the same time, I want to equalize the role of the NHRIs, National Human Rights Institution, as ombudsman person and different institutions, which is lying very important at the same time. That's why how many alternative reports we have to the state report, it will be possible to go to the dialogue, because it's not the question about the guilty, it's a question about how the international organizations, as CEDAW committee, for example, giving possibility using these NGOs state reports how it's to better, to change, to develop the system, how to resolve this problem in your country, especially specific to your country. That's why it's important for us to work bilaterally at all sides, with government, during the dialogue to the government, with NGOs, and using its possibilities, because NGOs can give the possibility to the development at all weak sides of the government. It's important. That's why we need to continue, and especially support from financial side, from technical side of the government of NGOs, very important. That's why we every time giving the proposals that NGOs will be supported by government with technical, with physical, with financial side, that they will continue for the humans, for the happiness, for the freedoms, for the human rights standards, especially in your country.
Thank you. How can support of parliamentarians be mobilised by the CEDAW committee to implement CEDAW GR40, the equal and inclusive representation of women and girls in decision-making systems?
You know that last year in October 2024, it's adopted new general recommendation. General recommendation on the equal and inclusive representation of women in decision-making systems. And today, women participation as a quota system, it will be as participation women in this parliamentary level or municipal level or in district level, or as a lawyers, as entrepreneurs, and at the same time, full different participation at all spheres. It's important because when we say about 50%, more than 50% of the population as a woman representation, women and girls in your country, it's important that they will participate during this process. If they will not process, then it will be crisis, financial crisis. It will be different sides of the crisis which come into your countries. That's why it's important that, especially this general recommendation, new possibilities. For example, general recommendation giving the new possibilities as a tech, artificial intelligence, women representation, and parliamentarians can use this, especially in this process. For example, for me, very interesting how the parliamentarians can be together, unity as a European Parliament system, for example, how they can give an input in the system and implementation during the General Recommendation 40 adopted by CEDAW Convention. Of course, during the all international conferences and all international agencies as Council of Europe, as different as the regional levels, as they have their own language, terminology, and they have, for example, in Council of Europe adopted gender equality strategy document, which is very important for us. But at the same time, I think the UN language as GR40, which adopted just last one, is implemented at all sides of the line, and it can be implemented through the parliaments using the implementation of the legislation, using the new language terminology for the reforming of the language. I know that United Kingdom has a very good language, for example, artificial intelligence adopted national action plan, including different documents. But at the same time, I think it's one of the bridges through the countries or through the international agencies using these possibilities and creating such kind of cooperation possibilities.
Now we come to your second music choice, Dr. Elgun. Would you like to tell us why you chose this one and a bit about it?
Thank you very much. We have Sarı Gelin. It's historical music, and we have the very famous singer, which are in the regional level, Azerin. She's using this as Sarı Gelin. It's historical music. Many countries using these possibilities as Sarı Gelin. It's using as a woman, which are life, giving the life and giving the possibility of the experience for the world, as using as this line. It's a history of the love, but at the same time, it means the persons as a Sarı Gelin is giving the bride, the marriage situation. That's why it's one of the historical musics which coming from the centuries of Azerbaijan culture, not just Azerbaijan, in Caucasian countries at the same time, in Turkish and different countries, but at the same time. But implementing and using these possibilities as a woman right, it's very important.
saçın ucu hörmezler, gülü su dermezler, sarı gelin saçın ucu hörmezler, gülü su dermezler, sarı gelin bu sevda ne sevdadır, seni bana vermezler. Neydim aman aman, neydim aman aman, sarı gelin bu sevda ne sevdadır, seni bana vermezler. Neydim aman aman, neydim aman aman, sarı gelin. Bu derenin uzunu çoban kaytar kuzunu, kuzunu. Bu derenin uzunu çoban kaytar kuzunu, kuzunu. Ne ola bir gün göreyim nazlı yarımın yüzünü. Neydim aman aman, neydim aman aman, sarı gelin. Ne ola bir gün göreyim nazlı yarımın yüzünü. Neydim aman aman, neydim aman aman, sarı gelin. Bu derenin uzunu çoban kaytar kuzunu. Bu derenin uzunu çoban kaytar kuzunu. Ne ola bir gün gören nazlı yarımın yüzünü. Neydim aman aman, neydim aman aman, sarı gelin. Ne ola bir gün göreyim nazlı yarımın yüzünü. Neydim aman aman, neydim aman aman, sarı gelin. Neydim aman aman, sarı gelin. Neydim aman aman, sarı gelin.
You're listening to A Bit of Everything.
And today my guest is Dr. Elgun Safarov, Vice Chair of the United Nations CEDAW Committee Working Group on Communications. And CEDAW General Recommendation 40 was adopted last year. How can women in civil society use this guidance to secure a seat at decision tables?
I think that it's a very important situation because now we are preparing the 45, it's fighting with the stereotypes. And when we go to the general recommendations, we have many documents. Next question we will discuss a little bit different. But now just I want to use that not any place is secure. We know that woman, when she participates in political life, in public life, she has double responsibility. First responsibility on the position, and the second responsibility because she's a woman. It's reality. She must make much more better than men, that she will going and the next woman will coming after her for the same position. That's why it's important on the European line. Of course, we know the fundamental system of human rights which coming and developing during these years, but for women on the place, it's very difficult. That's why we need on the political decision-making positions more women as representatives, because they are much more better entrepreneurship. They're paying all taxes. They're much more accurate. They're much more collaborating. That's why we're saying about the gender mainstreaming, for example, principle. So that's why we're saying about sustainable development goals, which include as a gender equality one of the main points. For me, as a person who are working close to 25 years in the human rights system, I think that women participation, especially and civil society secure positions in the decision making is very important. It's very difficult, unfortunately, today because civil society in several European countries have the problems of the accessibility to the financial support. Of course, we have the problems of the human rights standards. It's reality. We cannot say that in each European countries their standards are very high. They have the legislation. They have the many points are the same. For example, in the prevention of domestic violence, in the decision-making positions, or the accessibility, like equal rights in employment, fighting with the pay gap. It's a discussion. ILO, International Labour Organization Convention, certified by the most of the countries of the European region. But the problem of the implementation, which are much more open today, where we see the worst situation. When we comparing the implementation situation by the countries, we see that sometimes we have the problems of child marriage. It's reality. Sometimes we have the problems of domestic violence. Implementation, for example, protection order. For example, sometimes we have the problems of reality when we comparing the systems of the women representation in political parties, but at the same time there are no ministers, which is important. Women as a ministers must be participating as the heads of the departments, as the ministers of the international relations, health, structure, IT technologies is very important because it's the 21st century. It's already the third decade. That's why we need to compare what will be next for the next generation. What we're doing today, it will be the future, it will be the next 20 years. That's why sustainable development goals is for 2030. But what will be 2050? What we will get? What's the main goals? And I think that women input and participation in this process, as at the same time, civil society is very important to compare the situation as a human rights standards.
Thank you. Yes, it's very, very important. Inclusivity is very important, as you say, for the future. Come to the final question, Dr. Elgun. What are the gaps and how can UN CEDAW close the gaps in older women's rights via the dialogues and reports?
I want to go a little bit back. We know about the CEDAW Convention that it's adopted and implemented in 1980s, and United Kingdom, one of the countries which signed and ratified, and at the same time going to the report every time, very on the line, which is one of, at the same time, many European countries trying to push this question of the place. But we have the problem. It's reality. Compared to the statistic data, every 30 seconds we have in the world women and girls victims of the trafficking. More than 700 million women and girls was the victims of child marriage. It's the reality of today. I will not go to the statistic data of the domestic violence. I will not go to the statistic of suicides, which is very difficult situation in the Europe, by the way, too. Especially suicides, of women suicides attempts and girls. We see some bullying situation, for example, in schools against the girls. This is a difficult situation, but we need to go to the legislation that we have today creating standards. And one of the main standards is the CEDAW Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, all forms of discrimination against women. At the same time, by the organization of CEDAW Committee adopted special documents, for example, protection of women rights as a woman, for example, under the pension rights, using the pension possibilities as inclusion, as support measures. General Recommendation 27 on older women and protection of their human rights. which adopted in 2010. At the same time, we adopted per working paper on ending discrimination against older women, so the convention in 2002. At the same time, each year, as for UK, as for Singapore, as for France, as for all countries in the world which signed this convention, by the way, ratified by 189 countries in the world, this convention. It's one of the most ratified countries in the world. The first one is CRC, Child Rights Convention, and the second one is the CEDAW Convention. And today when we say what about older women rights, what's the real problem in our countries? It's about the pay gap, yes. It's about the employment, yes. It's about the pension rights, yes. What's another problem there? The victims of domestic violence, yes. The problems of the stereotypes, yes. And what will be the next future for our community if our grandmothers and our mothers victims of this violence? We need to continue coordination. We need to continue fighting for this women's rights. And today, unfortunately, we have the big gaps. And United Nations CEDAW Committee, using their possibility during each dialogue, creating such kind of standards, giving their recommendations for the older women, implementing, including them back to the employment. Why not? For example, back, giving the equality in pension rights. Why not? Giving the equality for the fighting with the all sides accessible non-paid health, for example, services for women which with all their pension rights. It's reality that women must have the same standards as men, sometimes more, because they already were the victims 20, 30 years ago, which victims of the system. And we cannot compare the reality because the standards implementations of better line begin in the 90s, but what was happening till the 90s years. That's why today the women who are victims of the non-equality, victims of discrimination, we need to fight with the discrimination on the legal side, which have we already. It's reality. But where is the support measures for the woman, which 1950s, what we discussed earlier with you, Mr. Young, which about a woman 50 years, 60 years, 70 years old, which has the possibility to the pension right. It's reality. And they must have possibility to go back to the employment at the same time, using this possibility, because it's a positive discrimination side. Women need to be equalized in the standards as a man, and using these possibilities, and using this for the development of the next generation. It's the life of the person. It's the life of the individual. That's why when we say about the woman rights, especially, it's not just the women who are beginning from as a girls, as a woman which beginning from the employment from 20, 30 years. No, it's a woman which living today. All community part members, which all regions, with all cities, from all villages must have the same rights as a man on the pension right. It's reality. And equality principle is one of the principles and standards at the same time. For me, it's one of the understandings that today we need to work on this side. Not just for me, I think that for world and for United Nations and the whole world community, that future depends from all individual rights what's happening today. And so this refugee, migrant process, domestic violence cases, war situations, and we need to fight. We need to fight for the equality in the community, because part of the community which happening, we need to compare the real situation what happening 20 years ago, 30 years ago. And the best lines, I think, are already done, but we need to continue on the side, especially for the woman, which already is a pension right, using an equality possibility and transparency as one of the principles of democracy. Because many politicians saying about the democracy and implementation and underlining this democracy as a principle, but what about the woman? What about the older woman? What about the standards in insurance, for example? What about the houses supporting processes? What about them? Because sometimes they're living in rent, sometimes they're limited in their work possibilities, because there are not so many people taking the woman and the pension as an older woman to the workplace. It's reality. But what about the new trainings, new courses, for example? So our general recommendation, as for example, can be used in the United Kingdom, by the way, as a general recommendation 14, giving that older women can be trained So the technology, artificial intelligence, and using the new possibilities and new resources for them to go back as a freelancers, for example. Why not? We can do it, and I think that it will be one of the challenges for the next generation. But the main possibilities as a sustainable development goals, taking so the Beijing platform and going through the CEDAW Convention as a part of the old system of full human rights, fundamental human rights. I want to thank to your radio and all listeners today that for your sharing with your ideas, with your questions with us, and try to give my best to this radio, and I wish you good luck.
Thank you, Dr. Elgun, and thank you very much for your time today. And I wanted to ask you for your third music choice.
The next one, it will be about Makeba. Makeba, we know that it's international. Sometimes, you know, in the radio, they're giving that Makeba much more entertainment question. But at the same time, Makeba, it's about the life of women who beginning the fight against discrimination in Africa countries, South Africa countries. That's why when we need to compare sharing that community, the world is not so big, world is small. And the same problems what we have in African countries, we have today in Europe, it's reality. Because these refugees coming to us, and limitation of the human rights in the different countries, it will be a problem in our home at the same time. Because the world is small and community is not so big. That's why we need to go on. At that time, it was sharing the history of the human rights, beginning as the suffragist history of the human rights in United Kingdom. In beginning 20th century, today we see the different system development in United Kingdom. One of the best examples. But at the same time, I think that Europe and all world must fight against this discrimination and using the best lines for the development. Thank you very much, Mr. Young.
Thank you, Dr. Elgun. Cheers.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Right.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah, you
Bye.
too.
She's gonna give ya a little smile. You can all make it go. The separation of 1,000 more. Ooh, make it bella. Gotta get a ooh, makes my body dance for ya. Ooh, make it bella. Gotta get a ooh, makes my body dance for ya. Ooh, make it bella.